So you've bought a bunch of companies, right? In your with Apple Tree.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I started Apple Tree in 1995. Struggled a lot for the first probably 4 or 5 years. I think we were maybe break even by like year 4. And it took 7 years to get Apple Tree to $1 million in revenue. And it was profitable at that point. But we didn't have a lot of cash, and I was taking most of the cash out of the business. And a really good friend of mine, in fact, I was the best man in his wedding. He is and was my accountant. He said, hey, have you ever thought about buying companies? And I laughed, and I said, buying companies? We don't have any money. Like, we have no cash. And he said, well, I have a bank relationship. I have a great banker. And if you can find the right deal, I think he might, back the deal. So that was in 2002. 2002. So there were some brokers in the industry we started talking to, and we would get, and this will tell you it was 2002. The broker would fax in a fax machine over the businesses for sale, and we started to make bids on these businesses, and we kept losing, and finally we said, all right, whatever comes through next, we're just going to bid full price. So we bid full price, and we won.
How big was your company at that time?
I know the exact numbers. We were 1.1 million in revenue, and you'll know in a minute why I knew the exact numbers.
And how many people were working for you at that time?
About 30.
Okay.
Yeah. One location, small.
Yeah.
So we bid on the next business that comes through. It's this little call center company in Pensacola, Florida. And sure enough, we hear back, we win the bid. So I looked at him, I said, well, what the hell are we going to do now? And he said, well, we're going to talk to Andy, our banker, and see. Sure enough, the bank is all in. They're totally excited. It was a recurring revenue call center business. They loved it. And they're willing to back it. So we go back and forth. We get the loan in place, and we fly to Pensacola to close. It's May of 2003. And for a lot of funny reasons and a really long story, the guy we were buying the business from wasn't a great guy. Was really nervous his staff was going to mutiny and didn't want him to know. And so we had to close the transaction at a little barbecue place in Pensacola called Smokey's Barbecue Joint. You'll know why this is important in a second too. So we're sitting at a picnic table at Smokey's, signing the documents to close this transaction, and we're getting ready to go tell the staff. And my cell phone rings. And it's the broker who basically sold us the business and that we had been placing all these other bids with. And he said, hey, the business you bid on in Portland, Maine that you lost, the deal fell through. It's back on the market. So I turned to Ralph, my CPA. I was the best man in his wedding, the guy that said you should sell or buy companies. So I turned to Ralph and I said, hey, it's Steve, and Portland's back on the market. And we had bid $1 million. We had bid $1.1 million. We lost to a bid of $1.2 million. And so Ralph turns to me and he said, tell him we can do $1 million. And I'm thinking, no, we can't, but okay. So I said, yeah, Steve, we'll rebid at $1 million. No problem. Signed some more documents. 5 minutes later, phone rings again. It's Steve. And he said, good news, they accept. I turned to Ralph, I go, what the hell are we going to do now? He goes, well, we're going to talk to the bank. So we close Smokey's Barbecue, go to the office, tell all the staff, I'm in full overwhelm, first company I've ever bought. And we're trying to, integrate it. And all of a sudden we have, this other deal. So we call our banker and he's like, yeah, we could probably do that. And I'm thinking, all right, I just borrowed $500,000 for this deal. I'm going to need to borrow another $1 million. That's $1.5 million. We did $1.1 million gross revenue last year. How's this going to work? So, but this banker was he was amazing. And he passed away years later and never got to see our ultimate exit, which was a tragedy. But he was our biggest cheerleader the whole way. Wow. So we closed the Pensacola deal, And we go back home and we start working with the bank on the Portland deal. And we get like right down to the wire on it. And Andy said, yep, we can do it, we can do it, we can do it. And then ultimately we're like a week from close on the Portland deal. And the bank's like, you know what? We don't think we can do it. So now I've got reputational risk. We had put down a deposit that we were going to lose. And again, it was only 25,000, but we were only $1 million in revenue business. It meant a tremendous amount to us. We're about to borrow more than last year's gross revenue. And so Ralph, the CPA who set the bank relationship up, called Andy and he said, listen, I've brought over $100 million in lending to the bank, and not a penny of that $100 million has ever gone bad. I believe in John and his company more than any deal I've ever brought you as a banker. And I will tell you right now, if you can't get this transaction closed, I will never bring another dollar of lending to the bank. Which leverage, we talk about leverage all the time. Think about the leverage we had there. So, and Andy wanted to do the deal too. It was the loan committee that had said no. So Andy then goes back to the lenders, the senior lenders, including the director of credit. And he said, listen, I'm not going to tell these guys no. I've bet my professional reputation on this. One of my closest, Ralph and Andy were close friends. One of my closest friends brought this deal. I said, we can do it. If you're going to tell them no, you're going to tell them yourself. They don't tell us any of this. So they said, fine, bring them in Friday. We're supposed to close on Tuesday. They said, fine, and this is Wednesday. They said, fine, have them come in Friday. They can tell us why they think it's a good idea, and then we'll tell them no. So, but we don't know that. We just think we're going to pitch the bank on why we think this is a good idea for the bank. So we go in Friday morning, 7 o'clock, and I'm not a morning person, so that was a stretch for me, but prepped all night. And we go in 7 o'clock the next morning, and we meet with the director of credit. Now, at most banks in the US, you have a loan committee, and you can kind of interact with some of them, the loan officers. They face the customers. And then they have this one person that they like hide in a closet who's never supposed to meet another human being because they don't want their emotions to sway their opinions. And all they do is analyze finance statements and that kind of stuff. And they're the ones that typically are the ones that say no. So the fact that we're even meeting with the head of credit was hilarious. So sure enough, we go in there and we had prepared and we pitched for 2 hours. And we knew something was up because 3 different times during that 2-hour meeting, his assistant came in and said, hey, Glenn, you've got a call at 8 o'clock. And he's like, cancel it. Hey, Glenn, you've got a call at 8:30. He's like, cancel it. I'm sweating bullets and the whole 9 yards. And so we're laying out our case why we think we're a good bet for the bank. And so we get done. And the very last thing Glenn says to me is as we're leaving, he goes, listen, I'm not going to give you my decision, but regardless of what we choose, I don't want to see you back here for at least a year. You have to figure out what you're doing with your business. I don't want to see you back here for at least a year. And I said, sure, no problem. And we walk out, and I don't even get to the car, and the phone rang, and it was Andy, our banker. He said, hey, they've approved it. Be here Monday, and you can close on sign paperwork Monday, and you can close on Tuesday. So we bought 2 companies 60 days apart in 2003 and borrowed more than our gross revenue in 2002. And there's some tremendous lessons into why the bank said yes, and I'm happy to share if you're interested why the bank said yes. So, and this thread kind of knits its way through a lot of how I see the world, especially the business world. Instead of seeing the world through my lens was, I want to buy this company and I need your money as the bank. I said, well, let me sit in Glenn's seat. Let me sit in the lender's seat. Let me sit in the loan committee seat. Let me sit in the CEO of the bank seat and think about this from their perspective. Here's some kid. I was 32 at the time. I was even younger than that. I was probably 30. And it's, he's done okay with his business, but it's small. We just lent him a bunch of money. Let's see if that works. So the bank sees massive risk. But that broker that we talked about with the faxes that sent all those over, He also had on his website the last 80 transactions that he had worked on in this, and we were in this tiny little boutique call center space, like not the big transactional call centers, but really high touch customer service. So, and he was the guy for all of the deals. So he listed all the deals, and what he had was and that industry back then used to trade on a multiple of monthly revenue, which is weird, but it traded on, because it was recurring, you would buy a multiple of the monthly average billing. So he had all the multiples that the deals had traded for, but more importantly, he had all the time to close. So the average length of time between the time the company wanted to go to market and the time they closed. And so what I did was, there were 80 of the deals. I took the bottom 5. And I said, well, they're the fire sale deals. We'll agree they're the worst multiples. Let's look at the bottom 5. So we did. And we took the bottom 5, and we took what our combined revenue was going to be after this transaction, plus my company, plus the one we had just bought in Pensacola. And we used that multiple as the fire sale value of the business. And we used the time to close to help the bank understand how fast they could perfect their credit if the credit went bad. So I laid that out for Glenn, and I said, look, here's the combined revenue, monthly billing of the 3 entities. We can all agree these are the fire sale values of what that revenue would be worth, and here's the time to close. Now, we didn't have assets. They were lending on cash flow, and most lending is done on assets, real estate and other things. So I said to him, listen, I know most of your lending is asset-based, and this is non-asset. You're lending on cash flow. But what if I say, if we're in default, you can immediately call this broker. You can immediately list the business for sale. Give us 5 days to fix our default, and then that's it. Call this broker. You can list the business for sale. If you sell it for a fire sale value, take the worst one of the 80. That number still perfects all your lending, and I will sign off. You can keep the rest. I don't even want, like, if I default, you can sell my company and keep it all. And he's like, why would you do that? I said, because I believe so strongly in this business that I know we're not going to default. We have plenty of room. We have plenty of margin. I understand you're worried. You see the risk. I'm giving you an out. There's no risk whatsoever. I go, by the way, the bottom 5 deals, the average time to close is 10 days. And the fire sale deal, the worst one, 80th of 80, 7 days to close. I said, this was the killer question. In 2 hours, one question changed everything. I said, Glenn, if you have a real estate deal that defaults and you have to perfect the real estate collateral, I go, on average, how many days does it take from the default until the bank is made whole on the default? And he looked at me and he shook his head and he goes, you know the answer and I know the answer. It's about 100 days for a bank to, sell distressed real estate. I go, well, here you can do it in a week or less. I go, do any of your hard asset lenders have collateral that you can perfect in less than a week? And he smiled and he said no. And that was the moment. And I didn't know it. I'm in like full present mode and I'm sweating bullets, but we found out later that was the moment. They said, okay, A, these guys get their business. B, these guys really understand risk. And C, they saw it through our lens and not their lens. And that was the big lesson there. So now I tell this story a lot and people say, well, it was 2003. Of course, the lending environment was totally different. This works today. And we have a couple tips in banking. Like if you're going to look for a bank, especially a bank that's going to lend on cash flow and not on assets, you want to find a bank that bets on people, not on financial statements. You want to find a bank that's regional so you can get to know who's making your decisions. The national banks in the US, and I'm sure in Europe and certainly in Canada, those banks have a loan committee that sits thousands of miles away from the customer. The customer and the loan committee never interact with each other. So when you're looking for a bank, you want to find a regional bank. Big enough to bet on you, but small enough that our litmus test is, can you have lunch with the CEO of the bank? And if the answer to that question is no, that bank might be too big for you. Because the CEO of Coca-Cola could have lunch with Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan. I could not have lunch with Jamie Dimon because we weren't big enough, the CEO of JP Morgan. But the CEO of Wilmington Savings Fund Society, the bank that backed me, and I are still friends to this day. And we've had many lunches and we've had many discussions about business and the future. So you want a bank where you can actually feel like the bank is your partner, not your vendor. And if you treat the bank like a partner, if they want financial statements every quarter, give them to them every month. If something's off in your financial statements, don't hope that they don't see it. Call them and say, hey, here's what happened, and here's the plan to fix it, and we're partners in this, and I want you to know that we're okay, and here's how we're going to deal with it. So if you think about a bank like a partner, not a vendor, you can have lunch with the CEO, and they're big enough to support you, that's a really great way to choose a bank. So I think the banking relationship is one of the most underappreciated and misunderstood. Most of the time, by the time we need the bank's money, there's too much risk and the bank doesn't want to give you any money. So the time to build your banking relationships is when things are going well, and then they're there for you when an opportunity pops up and you're going to buy 2 companies in 60 days, or you need to change your line of credit or whatever. But the bank relationship is so important.
What did the first year look like after you bought two companies?
Yeah, minus the fact that I was on airplanes a lot and totally frazzled, we knocked it out of the park. Because we knew our business. Like, we knew the fundamentals of how to operate this business, and we had gotten pretty good at it over time. Now, we made every mistake there was, and we learned from every mistake that we made, and it was torturous for that year, but from a finance side and a bank side, we killed it.
Yeah.
And we waited a year, and we went back to the bank almost at the 1-year mark and said, hey, we've found another company in Virginia, and here's the deal, and here's what we want to do. And they said yes in like an hour. And then after 4 or 5, maybe 6 deals, Andy called, our banker called. He said, hey, we've never had a customer where we've given them an acquisition line of credit, but you've demonstrated you really know what you're doing. We want to make it easier for you to do deals, so we want to give you a line of credit. As long as you follow the rules that you told us you follow, in terms of how much you'll pay, and which, by the way, is a great negotiating tactic. When you're pre-approved by a bank, but you can only pay a certain amount, and you're buying companies, it's really great to say, hey, I'd love to pay more for your company, but my bank caps the multiple that I can pay, which was kind of a side benefit, but a good one that came in handy a few times. But they gave us a line of credit and said, listen, as long as you stay within the guardrails, go out and do as many deals as you'd like. And then the ultimate moment with the bank, and this is my favorite part of the story, the whole financial crisis in 2008 really decimated the banking industry, and a lot of, especially cash flow lending, got super complicated. And so, there was that weekend in the US where banks were defaulting and big banks were buying each other in like 48 hours, and like all this crazy stuff was happening. And Monday morning, my phone rings and it's Andy, the banker, and he's like, hey, are you around today? We want to come see you. And I'm like, I knew this was all going to be too good to be true. The gravy train's over. Like, the bank's going to call all of our lending. Our line of credit's going to go away. So I said, sure. So 1 o'clock was the meeting. And normally Andy would be in a golf shirt and a pair of khaki pants and super casual. Here come 4 bankers in like suits and ties, march into our conference room, and they literally look like someone had just stole their Cheerios. Like, I mean, they were like, their heads were down. They looked like they had gotten beaten up in a fight.
How big was your company then?
We were probably about 15 million in revenue, and pretty profitable. Yeah. So maybe a little bit more, maybe 20. So they march in, they sit down, and I was like, wow, you guys had a rough weekend, huh? And they're like, you have no idea. And their biggest competitor over the weekend had defaulted. So they said, first off, that was a company called Wilmington Trust. They said, first off, we want you to know, we know Wilmington Trust defaulted over the weekend. We're okay. The bank is solvent, and there's no risk of default for us. But, and I'm like, here it comes. They said, we've lost a lot of confidence in most of our commercial borrowers. We have a handful of companies that we feel really good about, and of those companies, you're first on the list. So as a show of good faith, we want to double the amount of your line of credit. So on the worst banking day of the year, of probably the decade, on the worst banking day of the decade, our bank proactively, without us asking, doubled our acquisition line of credit. Literally like slid a piece of paper across the table and said, no fees, no cost, just sign off on it, we're gonna double it. But, and I'm like, oh God, here it comes again. They said, we need you to put this capital to work. We think you're gonna see a lot of opportunities in the world. We want you to be able to seize those opportunities. We're super confident in you as a customer. Please put that capital to work. We bought 7 companies in the next 14 months. We were buying a company every 2 months with the bank's line of credit. They were the best partner we could have ever had. So I'm a huge, huge believer. By the way, we never took a penny, a single penny of our own capital when we bought a company. We used seller financing and bank debt for all 24 transactions that we ever did. So our bank truly was a partner. In fact, their running joke was, you know, we really should be getting warrants on all this lending because we are your capital partner. But it was an incredible relationship right up until we sold the company.
So, okay, so you buy 2 companies, then you get the keys to the company, then what? What do you do?
Yeah, what do you do like the first day, I always ask this question. So I challenge entrepreneurs to go into their own companies tomorrow as if it's the first day.
Yeah.
Like look at it like you just got the keys. Our very first thing we would do is make sure the employees felt safe and secure and comfortable. Because what happens when you buy a company, nobody knows, and there's this big announcement, and all people hear when it's announced is, I'm gonna lose my job, I'm gonna lose my job, I'm gonna lose my job. And in the call center world, a lot of our team, you know, it's a different level, the frontline employees in a different socioeconomic situation. And for us, you know, losing a job or a customer and opportunity is an inconvenience, but it's not a catastrophe. For a frontline employee that's counting on that paycheck to paycheck, you lose a job suddenly, it's a catastrophe. So the very first thing we did was, and we had a rule, we would not cut a single person. Even if they were redundant, we'd find another place for them, we'd find another use for them, we'd put them in a different group or whatever. So we wouldn't cut any employees, and we would spend that whole first week making sure that they fully understood they were protected and they were safe. Interestingly, we would change the brand internally to our company was called Apple Tree Answers. We had a really cool brand and a lot of fun stuff around it. We would change the brand internally on day one. Like you are now, our frontline employees, we didn't call them agents or operators, we called them experts. You are now an Apple Tree expert from today forward. You are now part of the Apple Tree family. One of our rules was if we have a benefit that's better than what you had, you get it on day one. If you had a benefit here that's better than what we have, you get to keep it. So we had employees with some really funny perks and that we held on to because that we wanted the frontline employee to know, no matter what, they were safe. Now, if they were on their 3rd final warning and they were a disaster, we wiped the slate clean. But if they continued down that path, ultimately, that you know they might not last forever. But it was a clean slate on day one. Then we looked at kind of the operational efficiencies. We were really good at running these companies. Most of the companies we acquired weren't nearly as good operationally. So we'd look for areas to improve efficiency. Pricing was a huge one. Most of the companies we bought were wildly underpriced with their customers. Now, here was our dirty secret. We would change the brand internally on day one. We wouldn't change the brand externally for about a year. And we would raise prices and we would like right price. We'd look at every customer, where they were, where they should be price-wise. We would right price every customer under the old brand. So we would do damage to the brand that we bought, knowing that at some point in the future, we were gonna make the announcement, hey, the company's been sold and here's the new brand. Which was a funny, and again, we weren't smart enough to figure that out. It just sort of happened that way on the first couple deals, and then we figured out this is probably the way to go. Damage the old brand with the price increase and then change the brand to the new brand. But That was really the first 100 days, was just figuring out, like, what they were doing well, what we could learn, what they needed help with that we could teach, getting the pricing right, getting the staffing right, getting the scheduling right, really looking at the whole kind of operation.
It's funny, like it makes sense, as in you enter a company and then you improve the quality for the people that work there, and then you increase the prices so there's better profits, and basically that's a strategy.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And there's an arbitrage. So I believe we got an arbitrage on the pricing. And we had some rules. We had some really like hard and fast rules. We never bought a turnaround. So if a company was losing money, great, not for us.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't want to walk in, because if they're losing money, you got to make drastic change right away.
Yeah.
Employees are already terrified about what's going to happen. Drastic change, for me, just didn't feel authentic.
No.
So we'd look for a company with like 10 to 15% profitability. That was our sweet spot, because we knew with pricing, efficiency, staffing improvements, we could get them from 15 to 40 or 45% in about 60 days. So think about that for a second. If you buy a company, let's say they have $1 million in profit, and that's 15% of their gross revenue, and you pay 3 times, so you pay $3 million to buy $1 million in profit. But if you can go in and get them from 15 to 45, now it's $3 million in profit in 60 days, 90 sometimes. It's $3 million in profit. You still paid the $3 million for it. You take the multiple of EBITDA that you paid from 3x down to 1x. That's a massive arbitrage.
Yeah.
So that was a big part of our strategy, was to find kind of like the unpolished gem. Like, we didn't buy garbage. We didn't buy companies losing money, but we bought companies that weren't necessarily optimized. And then we would come in and help them be optimal. Yeah. And happier employees are more profitable, more productive, and easier to manage. So it was a win-win for everybody. The employees got happier, and the customers were happier, and we were charging enough so we could keep the employees and the customers happy. So everybody was winning, even though prices were going up and our profit was going up. So it wasn't like we went in and like scorched earth policy, we're going to cut a bunch of people and that's how we're going to drive profit up. We drove it the other way, kind of like, instead of slash and burn, it was, how do we make this asset better and kind of polish it up and make it more profitable. And we did that over and over and over.
Yeah, so you did 24 times?
24 times,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
And we got one wrong. We went 23 for 24.
Okay.
We bought a company in Memphis, Tennessee. I would never, ever, with all deference, and I'm sure people from Memphis may see this, I have friends in Memphis, close friends in Memphis. I would never buy a company in Memphis, Tennessee. It was just the workforce there. FedEx sucks all the oxygen out of Memphis. So FedEx is headquartered in Memphis, and trying to hire there and trying to be competitive on salaries and all the things, really, really hard, and we could never get it right. Memphis was about 4% of our gross revenue and consuming about 35% of our management attention.
Yeah.
And ultimately we exited that. We bought it, we tried for a year and a half, and we said, it's never gonna work.
Yeah.
And I sold it actually to a good friend of mine who had another business in Memphis and was happy to buy it.
Yeah.
So we didn't lose a ton, we lost a little bit, but so we went 23 for 24.
Yeah.
Not too bad.
Not too bad.
Yeah.
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 Awesome.
But it's another great point. Having an exit strategy for an acquisition that goes wrong, it's really, really important. You don't want to ride it to zero, because we were headed for zero value in Memphis. So having the courage and the forethought to say, all right, we tried, it's not going to work. What can we do to basically, to get out of this at whatever we can get out of it for, and having the courage to do that. Because entrepreneurs don't like to admit failure, ever.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll hold on to things way, way, way longer than we should, because we think we have the Midas touch and we can turn them around. But
Protect the downside.
definitely protect the downside. Yeah. And know going in, because, again, you have massive optimism when you buy a company. So know going in that, hey, these are the range of outcomes. And if we get into the lower end of the ranges. Here's the plan, and knowing that plan in advance, I think. And we did not know the plan in Memphis in advance. I was lucky that I could pick up the phone and call a friend of mine, and he was super excited to buy it. But after that, we had a plan, an exit strategy for anything that would go wrong.
So hearing you talk about like mergers and acquisition, it seems like you take like quite an opposite view to how to go about that. I feel like in maybe like many entrepreneurs that are more in the limelight take like this approach of like failing forward or like looking at the numbers or making quick changes in the company to turn things around, whereas you seem to be way more empathetic to like the human side of the business. And I was just wondering like if you could tell us like kind of like where that mindset comes from and also maybe even whether that's lacking a bit in like modern day entrepreneurship.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different philosophies on kind of how you think about the employee side of the world. And if you look at a company, there's really the stakeholders are the employees, the customers, the shareholders, the owners of the business, and now we talk about community as well. So how do you impact the broader community that you operate in? And some philosophies are customer first, and some philosophies are stakeholders first. And Business Roundtable actually said all four legs of the stool, community, customers, employees, shareholders, should all be equal. I believe, and I will never ever be talked out of, and I've had this debate ad nauseum, it's employee first. And everything else, if you get the employee side right, everything follows from there. So, and I learned this lesson interestingly. That very first company that we bought, I alluded to, he wasn't necessarily the greatest guy, and he hated his employees. And I mean with an H, a capital H, hated his employees. And minutes before we were about to go announce to all these employees that the company had been sold, he was up one side to me and down the other about this one particular person. And ugly racial stuff, just all these negative, like awful, awful. And I'm sitting there in like really uncomfortable disbelief that this guy could talk about one of his employees in this horrible way. And 30 seconds after that, we get up and we walk out and we make the announcement. And the exact employee that I just heard all this awful stuff about starts to like really get emotional and cry and say, please, please don't sell the company. You can't do that. And I'm sitting there thinking, no, 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 you don't get it. Like, it's going to be so much better. Like, you wouldn't believe, and I'm saying it all in my head. Obviously, I can't say it out loud, but I knew in that moment that all anybody hears when they hear the company's been sold is you're going to lose your job. And they're terrified. And that was the moment that it dawned on me, like, okay, I'm going to leave here after I buy this. I can't stay here forever. I'm going to leave. And these people have to continue to serve our customers and serve our customers with a smile. And they need to know 100% that I've got their back. So I learned it over time. And I'll never be talked out of the idea that the employees are the most critical asset in any company.